Hey everyone, and welcome to Mr. Ahmed's video screencasts. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 2.4, which deals with circle graphs. So moving right on to it, circle graphs are your graphs that look like this, where you've got a whole circle that's split down into these bare percentages, and these percentages will represent categories of whatever we're dealing with here. Okay, so the following circle graph shows how people in Maxine's office building get to work. So here you can probably assume that these percentages are talking about different ways that these workers are getting to work. Okay, so there are 350 people working in this building. So in a circle graph, you've got to have a title, you've got to have your circle graph, you've got to have the percentages that each little slice represent, and you've also got to have the legend as well. Okay, so this is really what you need right here for a circle graph. So moving right on to the questions, what percentage of the people walk to work, and how many people does this represent? So the percentage of people that walk to work, as you see here on your legend, the percent of people that walk to work, that would be the slice that would be colored in black. So looking over here, here's a slice, that's 3%. So 3% of people walk to work. Now, for this part of the question, how many people does this represent? Here's where things start getting a little trickier. What you've got to do is, what this question is really asking is, what is 3% of 350? Because we know that this entire circle is 350 people working in the building, and we know that 3% of those 350 people walk to work. So the way you'd go about doing this is that, first of all, you would take your 3%, okay? You take your 3%, you change it into its decimal counterpart. And the way you do that is by dividing by 100. So 3% as a decimal number would be 0.03. And then you take this value and then you multiply it by the total number of people in the building. You thus get 10.5, which you could probably round up to as being 11. Okay, so we can say that 11 people in this building walk to work. Okay, B is asking what percentage of people come to work in a car. How many people is this? So the people that come in a car, here you've got car alone, so that means they don't carpool, but we've also got a percentage of people that do carpool. Okay, so what you'll end up having to do is you're actually going to have to add these two together, okay, because both these categories involve getting to work in a car. So you've got 61% of people that get to work in a car alone, and you've got 9% of people getting to work by carpooling. So the sum of 61% and 9% together, that's 70%. And how many people is this? So you've got to figure out what is 70% of 350. So once again, taking a look at the calculator, you take that 70% and you divide it by 100 to change it into its decimal format, which is 0.7. Once you've done this, you now take this 0.7, which is 70% as a decimal, and you multiply it by 350, which is the total number of people working in this building. You get 245 people. So 245 people get to work by either carpooling or by driving alone. And then C is asking you, consider those who carpool, walk, or bike. Is this more or less than the number who take public transport? How many more or less? Okay, so considering those who carpool, walk, and bike. So carpool, walk, bike, and here they are, carpool, walk, bike, and walk. So 9%, 5%, and 3%. So 9, 10, 11, 12. This gives you 17% total carpool, bike, and walk. So, and then they're asking you to compare these to the number of people who take public transport. So public transport would be 22%. Okay, so we can see that 22% of people take public transport, whereas 17% of people will take those three types of transportation method. Okay, is this more or less than the number who take public transport? I think we can clearly say that it's less because it's only 17% when compared to 22% who take public transport. How many more or less? So when it's asking how many more or less, we can see that it's 5% less, right? Because if you've got 22% here, which is the percent of public transport, right? And then here you've got 17%, that means that the difference between the two would be 5%. So what you can do is you can actually go and figure out what is that 5%, like how many people does that 5% represent? Or if you really wanted to just figure out how many people take public transport and then subtract that from the number of people that carpool, walk, and bike, that would also work. So I'll show you both ways actually. So we did say that if for public transport, you've got 22% of people taking public transport. And then for these three, so carpooling, walking, and biking, that's 17%. So 22 minus 17, that's 5% that I would change into a decimal by dividing by 100, which is 0.05, and then I would multiply by 350 to get 17.5. So 17.5 people less, and I think we can probably say that that's 17 or 18 people. Okay. Now the other way you would go about doing this is just by figuring out what is 22% of 350, what is 17% of 350, and then just subtracting the two. Okay. So 22% as a decimal is 0.22. This represents 77 people. Okay. Now, 17% as a decimal is 0.17, which when multiplied by 350 gives us 59.5. So 77 people take public transport and 59.5 people will take carpooling, biking, and walking. So I would subtract these two numbers to figure out how many more people take public transport. There you go, 17.5. Okay. And they decide to just say that that's 17 people. Okay. So that was example 1. You've got some build your skills questions that you can work on. And moving on to example 2. So Jasmine surveyed students at her college to find out how they commute to school. The results are shown in the table below. Create a circle graph of the data. Now, again, for a circle graph, you will need to have a title, but you're also going to need to be able to take these this data and make slices of it on your circle graph. And so that's kind of where making a circle graph is trickier than making other types of graphs, like the other graphs that we've seen. Now, first of all, this is the survey results of the mode of transportation to school. Okay, so the means of travel, so car, carpool, motorbike, bus, bicycle, and walk, and the number of people. Now, the first thing you want to figure out is how many people in total are there, okay? Because once you've figured out how many people in total there are, then you can start figuring out the percentage that each one of these represents, okay? So we've got 75 people that take the car alone, 20 people that carpool, 5 that motorbike, 75 that take the bus, 10 that bike, and 15 that walk. That's a total of 200 people. Okay, so the first step to making a circle graph, knowing now that you've got 200 people, is to figure out the percentage that each one of these little categories should occupy on your circle graph. So for example, if you're taking the car alone, that's 75 of 200 people. So here's what it is as a decimal, but then to go from a decimal to a percentage, you've got to multiply by 100. So that's 37.5% of people take the car alone. Now let's do that with the carpool. That's 20 people. You divide it by 200, which is the total number of people, and then you multiply by 100. That's 10%. Okay, so carpooling is 10%. Let's do that with motorbike as well. So 5 people out of 200 times 100, that's 2.5%. and the number of people that bus, that's 75 people divided by 200, and then times 100, so that's again 37.5%, and biking would be 10 divided by 200 times 100, that's 5%, and then walking, 15 divided by 200 times 100, that's 7.5%. So the first step is to actually figure out the percentages that all of these represent. And that's kind of what they did here. So they did that for you, okay? So they figured out the percentages. Now, the next step, because you still need to accurately put these percentages onto the circle graph itself. Now, a reminder that the circle graph, that a circle has an angle of 360 degrees. So if you had to go and figure out, well, how big should I make each portion or category, what you'd have to do is that you'd have to take the percentages that we just calculated, and you'd have to figure out these percentages would represent how much of 360 degrees. So, for example, 75 people. We'd figured that to be 37.5%, right? So otherwise 0.375 as a decimal, okay? So 75 people represents 37.5% of 200 people. Well, in order to put that on your graph, it also needs to represent 37.5% of 360 degrees, okay? Because once again, a circle has a total angle of 360 degrees. So if you're trying to figure out how much a certain category should occupy of the circle, so how many degrees should 37.5% occupy in the circle, well, you've got to take that and you multiply it by 360. Oh, the people that take the car, that would be a category that would occupy 135 degrees. Okay, let's do another two examples here. So carpool, for example. Well, carpool is 20 people. We had said that was, well, we said that was 10%, right? But you'd want to leave that as its decimal, okay? Which is 0.1%. So, sorry, 0.1%, sorry, just 0.1, okay? It is 10%. 10% as a decimal is just 0.1, okay? So you've got to figure out what is 0.1 of, or 10% of, 360. So you multiply by 360. That's 36 degrees. That means that this category should occupy 36 degrees of your circle. Okay? Doing the motorbike, that's 5 people out of 200. Here's what that is as a decimal. That's 2.5%. But here it is as a decimal. You take that and you multiply it by 360. Your motorbike category should occupy 9 degrees. Okay? And that's actually what your workbook shows you here. Okay? So next, calculate how many degrees of the 360 degrees of a circle are represented by each category. So again, here are the percentages as decimal numbers, and you take them and you multiply them by 360 degrees to figure out how many degrees each category occupies. Once you've figured out the total number of degrees that each category occupies, now mind you, these should all add up to 360 degrees. If they don't, that means you made a mistake somewhere. So let's just check that these do add up to 360. So 135 plus 36 plus 9 plus 135 plus 18 plus 27. Yep, these all add up to 360 degrees. And so that's kind of a way to check to see if you made a mistake anywhere. If those don't all add up to 360 degrees, that means that you did make a mistake. Well, so now the last step is really just to use your protractor and measure up the degrees. And then just draw the categories, and that's pretty much it. So the hard part was really just figuring out how many degrees would each category occupy. So again, if you know that a category occupies 37.5%, well, you'd have to figure out what is 37.5% of 360 degrees, okay? And so you just go ahead and you graph it like this. You make sure that you do have a legend. Okay? Otherwise, if you don't have a legend, then people don't know what they're looking at. So make sure that you do have a legend. Otherwise, that's pretty much it for circle graphs. You've got a few build your skills questions over here. And you've got your practice your new skills questions. So these guys are going to be these questions are going to be dealing with circle graphs. Okay. But you've also got your chapter test. So we are done the second chapter, which dealt strictly with just graphical representations. So here's your chapter test. I do strongly recommend that you do this chapter test as a way of kind of doing a review of this entire unit. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. Just stay tuned for chapter 3. Thank you very much.